Good evening, everyone. Where's Rick Fagan?
He's driving. He said he was third on the list, so just start without.
Okay, I'll drop him down. Hey, Rick, you're going to be going up second. Then we'll have Sil will be third. Dick Strohmeyer, you'll be fourth. Jerry Bach after that. And then we'll see what happens after that. We'll give it 5 minutes and for people to get here. They're still coming over, and then we'll get started.
Traveling in packs so I can't carry anymore. Waiting for somebody else to carry me. There's nothing that's there for me at my door. All the people I know aren't who they used to be. And if I try to change my life for more day, there would be nobody else to save. And I can't change into a person I don't wanna be. So, oh, it's Saturday night. I pray for the wicked on the weekend. Mama, can I get another amen?
You know, before we start, and while waiting for people to get in, I want to tell you a little story. We've been talking about being joyful and everything, you know. And this very joyful and zealous, soul-winning young preacher, really recently, went down to Louisiana. He came upon Boudreaux. He was working in his field. And being concerned about old Boudreaux's soul, the preacher asked Boudreaux, he said, "Are you laboring in the vineyard of the Lord, my good man?" And Boudreaux, not even looking up, the preacher and continued his work, replied, "Nah, these are soybeans." "You don't understand," said the preacher. "Are you a Christian?" And with the same amount of interest as the first time, Boudreaux said, "No, my name is Boudreaux. You must be looking for Jim Christian. He lives about a mile down the road." The young, determined preacher tried again, asking Boudreaux, "Are you lost?" "Now, I've lived here all my life," said Boudreaux. "Are you prepared for the rapture?" And he was getting very frustrated this time, this preacher was. It's caught Boudreaux's attention. And he asked, when that's going to be? And boy, this little preacher, thinking he had accomplished something, he said, it could be today, it could be tomorrow, or it could be the next day. And Boudreaux took a handkerchief from his pocket and he wiped his brow and he said, "Now, I don't want you to mention that to my wife, Marie, because she want to go all 3 days." And I'll give you one more story before I go. And this is an old story. You've heard it before. Boudreaux decided he was going to declare war on Washington. And he called the Department of Defense and he said, "This is Boudreaux and my boys from Louisiana, and we're declaring a war on y'all." Secretary said, "That's kind of interesting." He said, "How many weapons you got?" "Oh," he said, "we got some shotguns and stuff like that." Well, he said, I've got 200,000 men here in Washington with guns and everything." He said, "You still want to fight, you dumb Cajun?" He said, "I'll call you tomorrow." Next day, Boudreaux calls up and he said, "The war's on." Secretary said, well, how many men you got now? Oh, he said, we picked up a few more men. He said, we got some more shotguns and tractors and stuff like that. He said, well, I got 500,000 men here in Washington right now. You still want to fight? Boudreaux said, I'll call you tomorrow. Next day, Boudreaux calls. He said, the war's still on. Secretary said, well, what you got now? He said, oh, man, we picked us up an ultralight or two and some more tractors and shotguns. He said, I want to tell you, I got 2 million men here in Washington with tanks and everything. He said, you still want to fight? Boudreaux said, I'll call you tomorrow. They called him the next day. He said, the war's off. Secretary said, well, I knew you'd come to your senses. He said, me with all my men and equipment and stuff like that. We said, no. I said, it's nothing like that. He said, me and the boys, we had a little meeting last night, and we didn't come to the conclusion. There's just no way we can feed 2 million prisoners. Well, in the past, we've always started our NDICE Follies with the group from Louisville singing a little song, and you've been here before, you know the song. So I'll ask those from Louisville to please come up at this time. And anybody else that wants to join them. I mean, we're not going to be exclusive. Come on up. That's all right, you know it by heart. I lost my copy too.
Some of you have copies. We have not practiced this year, so it's been at least 2 years. We're figuring that the song has been around about 20 years, so some of you've heard it frequently. You know that we don't know the words. We hardly know the tune. And if Syl Nixon was here, he would be very, very aghast that we hadn't practiced. Okay.
Where's Danny Nash at?
Oh, yeah. Where's our deacon director?
Where's he at? Get your butt up here. Come on.
Come on.
No. Boudreaux, go get him. Boudreaux, go get him. Trey, where are you at?
Oh, yeah, the assistant director.
Yeah, You thought you were going to get out of this stuff,
It's all part of the job, Trey.
We need to have the entire diaconate officer.
That's right.
I want you guys to know not only are we not practiced for 2 years, but she gave me the paper with the words, and at the very bottom it says, note, the words have changed to this edition. So are we prepared or what?
You're back here.
Are we ready? Choir?
All right. Ready?
Ready?
1, 2,
Go.
go.
Another evening of fun and cheer. So settle back, relax, let's go. Another NDICE, another show.
Come on, you gotta
Another NDICE, another year. We deacons come from far and near. We come to work, we come to pray. Another NDICE, may we find the way.
Another NDICE,
another year. We deacon wives are glad to be here. To learn, to discern, to pray and to grow. To meet with friends from Maine to Mexico.
But tonight we are taking a break. Tonight is the Follies flambe. Tonight we ha and ho. We'll listen and pray, but tonight is the show. Another NDICE, another year. Another evening of fun and cheer. So settle back, relax, let go. Another NDICE and another show.
Are we good or what? Thank you all.
Yeah, you might as well stay.
Okay, thank you. Oh, don't fall. Oh, it should be easy.
Well, I started to invite that group of kids from Bellevue Baptist in Memphis that are here well, because they had 200 of them plus sponsors. Where would we put them? They're here. They just stopped for dinner, and they were an hour late. That's why they were in there with us. But they're singing in some park tomorrow, they told me. I talked to a couple of the sponsors, and that church in Memphis is huge. It probably seats, about 5,000, Frank? Yeah. It's a huge, huge facility off the interstate there. But anyhow, Boudreaux. Boudreaux had a job as a cab driver in Baton Rouge. And one day, Jim Galbraith, Texan, flew in, and Boudreaux picked him up. Where's Jim? Oh, there he is back there. Anyhow, Boudreaux picked him up, and they're driving along, and they go by the Capitol building. And Jim said, "What's that building there?" And Boudreaux said, "That's the Capitol building." He said, "How long it took to build that?" Boudreaux said, "Man, a couple years, I'm sure." Galbraith said, "In Austin, we got one that's better than that, and we built it in no time flat." So they go by the campus of LSU, and Galbraith said, "What's that stadium there? How long it took y'all to build that?" Boudreaux said, "Well, I think they started in about the 1920s building that." He said, "Well, man, we got a good one in in Austin. We built it quicker than that. It's nice." Well, Boudreaux's getting a little perturbed by that. So they go by the bridge in Mississippi, the Mississippi River Bridge, and Jim asked Boudreaux, he said, "How long that bridge been there?" Boudreaux said, "I don't know. I was by here this morning. It wasn't there." All right. Now we're going to bring up Rick Fagan, and he's got a story about an Irish priest. All right.
Jim, it's not about sheep. Gotta be smarter than the mic. It's not about sheep, Jim. I have a wee bit of an Irish story for you. There once was an Irish priest. He didn't like the British. He didn't like them at all. He began to tell stories in his homilies about the British. His parishioners quit coming. Some of them went to the bishop and the bishop called him in and said, "Father, you cannot be telling stories about the British. I don't like them either, but it's not right, Father. It's not holy." Time went by, the parishioners started coming back. They kept thinking in their minds, one of these days he's going to tell a story about the British, but he didn't. Well, it got to be Holy Thursday, institution of the Holy Eucharist. He thought he would tell the story about the Last Supper. And as best as I can recall, the story went something like this. Jesus looked at his disciples and said, "One of you here will betray me." They were aghast. Andrew stood up and said, "Is it I, Lord?" Jesus said, "Andrew, you're a loyal and trusty servant. It isn't you. Sit down." Seamus stood up. Now, you probably didn't know there was a disciple named Seamus. This is an Irish story. Seamus stood up and said, "Is it I, Lord?" Seamus, you too are a loyal and trusty servant. Sit down, Seamus. Peter stood up and said, "Is it I, Lord?" Peter, you might deny me 3 times, but you'll never betray me. And for a wee moment, our Lord's eyes cast his eyes on Judas Iscariot, sitting at the far end of the table. Judas Iscariot began to be nervous, began to fidget around. Finally, he stood up and he looked at our Lord dead in the eye and he said, "I say, governor, is it me?" My Irish roots go back to 1745, born in the United States, and that's the best Irish I can do.
Well, they had the Irish version of the Last Supper, but I don't want to tell you right now, they got a Cajun version of the Last Supper too. And I'm going to show that to y'all. No, that's not the one. That's the sponsor. They even got the paper on the table like we do. You know, yeah, this guy that got that contract to bring some monkeys to the zoo in New Orleans, and he's from Florida, and he's coming down I-10 with all them monkeys in his truck, each in their own cage, and all of a sudden his truck started having trouble, and there was smoke everywhere. So he pulled off on the side of the road, and he looked at it and called a repair shop, and the guy said, "Sounds like your water pump." He says, "It was take me about 6 hours to get out there and fix that." Just about that time, here come Boudreaux down the interstate. He'd been to the French market, and he sold all his turnips, and his truck is empty. And you know them Cajuns, they stop and help everybody. He said, "Why your hood is up?" The guy said, "Oh, it's my water pump." He said, "But worse than that," he said, "I got these load of monkeys I got to take to the zoo, and it's going to take 6 hours." Boudreaux said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "I'm going to take them monkeys to the zoo for you." That guy said, "Oh, man, I tell you what," I said, "I'm going to give you $50 to take them monkeys to the zoo for me." So Boudreaux said, "Okay, let's load them up in my truck." And he did, and off he went. Well, a couple hours later, the guy's still on the side of the road. Here come Boudreaux down the road, still got them monkeys in his truck. Guy hailed him down, and he said, "Hey," he said, "didn't I pay you $50 to take them monkeys to the zoo?" Boudreaux said, "Yeah, I did that." And he said, "We got some money left over. Now we're going to the beach." Okay, now the next guy coming up here is our sing-along man, Sil. We know we've done it year after year, and sing along with Sil. So here comes Sil.
Remember those old belts they used to have in the 60s? The hippies used to wear those belts. The problems I have is this is one of them. This is my wife, Dorothy. She's going to be my official page turner. These songs I should know by heart, but, you know, when things get going, you never know. So, and they should be songs you know. So please, I mean, this isn't the first time I'm playing these songs here in front of you all. Please join in our singing along. Let me tell you the story of a man named Charlie on a tragic, fateful day. With 10 cents in his pocket, kissed his wife and family, went to the MTA. Did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unlearned. Poor old Charlie, he may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Charlie put in his nickel at the Kendall Street station, bound for Jamaica Plain. When he got there, conductor said just one more nickel. Charlie couldn't get off of that train. Did he ever return? No. And his fate is still unlearned. Poor old Charlie, forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Now all night long Charlie rides through that station crying, what will become of me? How can I afford to see my sister in Chelsea or my brother in Roxbury? Well, did he ever return? And his fate is still unlearned. He may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Now Charlie's wife was down to the Scully Square station every day about 2:15. And through the open window she and Charlie a sandwich as that train goes rumbling through. Well, did he ever return? And his fate, thank you. Poor old Charlie, he may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Now you citizens of Boston, don't you think it's a scandal the way the people must pay and pay? Fight the fare increase, vote for George C. Murphy, get the Charlie off that MTA. Well, did he ever return? No, he never returned, and his fate is still unmarked. He may ride forever neath the streets of Boston. He's the man who never returned. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. Met her on a mountain. There I took her life. Met her on that mountain. Stabbed her with my knife. Oh, well, now, boys, hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. This time tomorrow morning, reckon where I'll be. Hadn't been for Mr. Grayson, I'd have been in Tennessee. Oh, well, now, boys, hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. This time tomorrow morning, reckon where I'll be. Down in some lonesome valley, hanging from a white oak tree. Well, now, boys, hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Hang down your head and cry. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Poor boy, you're bound to die. Up the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Little Jenny Faber loved that rascal Puff and brought him strings and sealing wax and other fancy stuff. Oh, Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Together they would travel on a boat with billowed sail. Jackie kept a lookout perched on Puff's gigantic tail. Noble kings and princes would bow whenever they came, and pirate ships would lower their flag when Puff roared out his name. Oh, Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea. I can't hear you. Frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Thank you. Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. No, a dragon lives forever, but not so little boys. Painted wings and giant's rings make way for other toys. One great night it happened, Jackie Caper came no more, and Puff, that mighty dragon, well, he ceased his fearless roar. Oh, Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. lay along the cherry lane without his lifelong friend. Puff could not be brave, so Puff, that mighty dragon, sadly slipped into his cave. Oh, one last Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Annalee. Puff, the magic dragon, lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Annalee. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you.
We'll bring it back at the end.
Oh, yeah.
We do, you remember?
Oh, that's right.
Well, it's time for a word from our sponsor. This show is being sponsored by an outside entity, and we're gonna do that right now. Boudreaux's butt paste. I want to tell you something about this stuff. You know, sometimes you get these people that kind of rub you the wrong way. And they irritate a certain part of your body. Well, I want to tell you this. When that happened, get you about a tube of this stuff, this Boudreaux's butt paste, and you rub it on there, and it's going to take care of it. I guarantee. So let me tell you a little story about Boudreaux's butt paste. Some of you might have heard this story before. George Boudreaux is a pharmacist in Covington, Louisiana, and he invented this. It's for, you know, diaper rash and stuff. It's the best that you can buy, zinc oxide, and but anyhow, he was marketing it locally in Louisiana and down in the South, and Walgreens came and wanted his corner, and George gave him an exorbitant price, and they paid it. So that gave him the opportunity to go now. He was on the Oprah Winfrey Show with this stuff at one time, and I met George at a tailgating at an LSU football game, and I told him, I said, George, I said, I use your butt paste and I tell him that's the sponsor of the show, the little things I do. And he said, come to my motorhome. Well, he had about a 45-foot motorhome called a Buttmobile. And he took me in there, he gave me all this stuff, and he told me, anything you need, call me. I'll get on the online, and I'll send it to you. Great guy. But that's a true story. He did sell that. I think he got something in the millions for that drugstore. Anyhow, so that's our sponsor for the night, Boudreaux's butt paste. You probably could get it on Amazon, yeah. If not, maybe he still has his website. You can get it there. NASA got word that them guys down there at Boudreaux were building a rocket ship. So they sent a representative down to Louisiana, and they checked, and the guy asked this guy, he said, hey, I heard these guys are building a rocket ship. Oh, yeah, he said, that's Boudreaux and his boys. They're down the road down there. So NASA guy went down there, and he said, hey, y'all building a rocket? Yeah. He said, what y'all going to make that out of? He says, well, we're going to make that out of cypress, man. It lasts a long time. He said, what's them guys doing up at the top? He said, oh, they're putting that caulking compound on the window so the air don't get in. He said, what y'all going to do for rocket fuel? Well, he said, first we're going to start with a roux. And he said, Cajun cooking always start with a roux. Anyhow, he said, where y'all going with that? He said, Boudreaux said, for the first time, we're going to the sun. That guy said, man, he said, you got to be stupid. He said, you're going to get close to that sun that's going to burn that rocket ship up, and That's what you get for not rehearsing. He says you're going to burn that rocket ship up, you know, and you ain't got a chance. Boudreaux said, no. He says, me and that's not stupid, it's you. He said, we're going at night. All right, Dick Strohmeyer, come on up. Here's Dick. Let's give him a big hand. And Dick is one of our first-time people here, so he's brave, so, not like some of y'all.
My mom been raised OJ. That's right.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Mine is not going to be as lively as that, but at any rate, I think I'm going to start out with a few priest jokes. There was this young couple. They invited after Mass. The priest was greeting everybody on their way out the door, and this young couple came up to him, and they invited him over for Sunday dinner. So he agreed. They wrote down their address, said just show up at 4 o'clock, and we'll have everything ready, or try to be ready. So he showed up 4 o'clock, knocked on the door. The husband answers the door, greets the priest, takes him in, seats him at the table in the dining room, and there's this little guy sitting in there in a high chair. And the father then went in to help his wife get the food together and stuff and bring everything in, and finally they all sat down at the table, and the husband said to the priest, Father, would you say grace? And the priest said, sure. Dear Lord, thank you for this food, amen. Little Johnny looks up at him from the high chair, and he says, gee, Father, you don't talk so long when you're hungry. And I'm checking these off. I've got about 10. Some are much better than others, but anyway. Another one, this priest has a reputation of giving extremely long homilies. Well, one day he's in the middle of his homily, and this gentleman in the middle of the one side of the church comes out of his pew, doesn't genuflect, goes out with the back doors. And he shows up about the closing prayer. So the priest saw him come back in, and he paid attention to what he looked like, where he was sitting and stuff. And the priest caught up with him on the way out the door. He said, didn't I see you get up and leave during the homily? And the guy said, yeah. And didn't you come back at the closing prayer? Yeah, I did. Well, can I ask you why you had to leave? The guy said, well, I needed a haircut. And the priest said, well, couldn't you get a haircut before Mass? And the guy said, I didn't need one before Mass. Yeah, you can use that places, I'm sure. Okay, this priest was leaving on a trip to Rome, and this young man come running up to him and said, Father, I know you're on your way to Rome. Would you pray for my wife and I? We just got married. We'd really love to have children. And the priest said, sure, I'll even light a candle for you while I'm over there. So about 12 years later, the priest runs into this guy in a supermarket, and the guy's got 8 kids tagging along with him. And the priest said, well, this is wonderful. He said, but where's your wife? Oh, she's on her way back to Rome to blow out the candle. What's that? You're pitching on Thursday. Yeah. Okay. All right. And now I'm going to pick on 4-year-olds. Then most of these jokes I do a communion service on Tuesday afternoon in a senior living place, kind of an upscale place. And I had a couple ladies there who always bring me jokes to tell after communion service. And they like to have a good joke. So anyway, some of their jokes I could repeat, some of them I couldn't. But anyway, yeah, so that's where quite a few of these came from. Well, anyway, this mother took her 4-year-old with her along to a nursing home. And the 4-year-old, she's just amazed walking down the hall. You know, she sees the wheelchairs, the walkers, the lifts, and all this kind of stuff. And she's just amazed at all this apparatus and stuff. So they turn into her mother's friend's room. Her mother's friend's laying in the bed, and there on the nightstand is the lady's dentures, just laying on the nightstand. The little girl walked over there, and she looked back at her mom and said, Tooth Fairy's just not going to understand this. All right. Oh, here we go. There was a man who was having hearing problems. So, and I don't want to offend everybody. I'm just giving you what they gave me. But anyway, he goes to the specialist, and the specialist checks him out, and he said, well, your hearing aids that you have are not doing the job for you anymore, so I recommend these new state-of-the-art hearing aids. So he fitted him up with the hearing aids. He said, I want you to try them for a couple of weeks and come back in, and I'll test your hearing. So the guy tried him out. A couple of weeks later, he got an appointment, came back in. And the doctor tested him. He said, man, your hearing's back 100%. He said, I'll bet your family is thrilled. The guy says, shh, I haven't told him yet. I just sit back and listen. And he said, I've changed my will 4 times now. All right. Here's another 4-year-old. This mom is trying to get the ketchup out of her bottle. You know how it used to be before you had the squeeze bottles, you're shaking and everything else. Well, she's working on the bottle and the phone rang. So she had her 4-year-old daughter answer the phone. And the mother's listening to her daughter as she's trying to get the ketchup out. And the little girl says to the person on the other end of the line, so Mommy can't come to the phone right now, she's hitting the bottle. All right, and then this man comes home after work, and he and his wife have dinner together, you know, and stuff. And this one kind of goes, well, it's not homily material, let's put it this way. Kind of implies infidelity, kind of implies, well, there are definitely some domestic abuse and lying and stuff, none of which would be good for marriage. But anyway, this man sits down in his easy chair after dinner, falls asleep. He's laid back, falling asleep. Pretty soon his wife comes up behind him with a saucepan and just whacks him over the head and puts him out. When he finally came to, he said, well, what'd you do that for? She said, I was doing laundry the other day and I cleaned out your pockets and I found a little note in there. It said, Mary Lou. He said, you remember 4 days ago I went to the racetrack? That's the horse I bet on. So she's all apologetic and stuff. So he apologizes, they get everything fixed up. About 4 days later, he's sitting in his easy chair again. This time she comes up with a cast iron skillet and really lays him out. When he finally comes around, he says, now what'd you do that for? She said, your horse called. All right. Okay. And here's one about the husband and wife. They do everything together. I'll go out to dinner together. Everything they do together. Go to the grocery, go to the gas station, whatever it may be. Well, they both went to the doctor together. And he had an appointment, and then she had an appointment, and then the doctor called them in together. And he said, you know, you're getting up there in years, and both of you are having memory issues. He said, I suggest you each carry a notepad and a pencil. So on their way home, they bought notepads. They already had pencils and stuff. And that evening after dinner, they're sitting down, and she says to her husband, she said, honey, she said, I'd really like a dish of vanilla ice cream. And she said, and he said, okay. And she said, well, don't you think you ought to write that down? He said, no, I'll remember. She said, well, could you put a little bit of chocolate topping on it? And he said, sure. She said, I know you need to write that down. In fact, I'll write it down for you. And he said, no, I'll remember. So then she said, well, could you put a little bit of raspberry topping over the chocolate too? He said, sure, I'll do that. She said, you got to write it down. No, I'll go right to the kitchen and get it. So he's gone for about a half an hour, and pretty soon he comes in there, and he sits down with a plate of scrambled eggs and diced ham in front of her. And she said, well, sweetheart, this is wonderful, but you forgot the toast. Okay. All right. There was this guy. He was real lonely and stuff, you know, living by himself. And he went to the pet store and he talked to the owner. And the owner said, "Well, he said, I got this talking parrot that would really be good company for you." So the guy checked it out and he bought the parrot and he took it home. And all this parrot would do is cuss and insult this guy and stuff like that. And he finally got tired of it. He tried everything he could get to shut the parrot up or to get him to be nicer or whatever, and it didn't work. So one day he opened up the freezer and he set the parrot in there and let the parrot in there. The parrot's just squawking and talking and cussing and carrying on. And finally it got quieter and quieter, and finally he didn't hear anything else. He thought, well, I better get the parrot out of there. So he reaches in and as he gets the parrot out, he pulls out a turkey and sets it in the sink. And so anyway, he watches the parrot sitting there on the edge of the sink, and the parrot's standing there shaking and chattering, and finally he gets around to where he could talk. And he apologizes to the guy. He said, "I'm sorry I've been so hard on you and insulting and everything like that." He said, "But could you tell me what the turkey said?" All right, let me see here. Is it time? Yeah. All right, one more. I do have two, but one more. All right, this little girl walks up. You ladies will probably like this. This little girl walks up to her mom and said, "Mommy, where did we come from? Where do humans come from?" And her mom said, "Well, it's pretty easy. God made Adam and Eve thousands of years ago, and Adam and Eve had children, and their children had children, and right on down the line, and that's where we came from." So the little girl was happy with that. A couple days later, she catches her dad out in the garage and said, "Daddy, where did humans come from? Where did we come from?" He said, "Well, dear, thousands of years ago, God made monkeys, and we evolved from the monkeys." So little girl's all upset. She goes running back to her mom. She says, "Mommy, you told me God made Adam and Eve, and we came from Adam and Eve, and Daddy says we came from the monkeys." And her mom looked at her and said, "Sweetheart, it's really simple. I was telling you about my side of the family."
Thank you, Dick. You know, you mentioned the horse race. They had this priest that went to the horse races, and Boudreaux, who was not Catholic, went to the horse races. And at the first race, the priest went out there and he blessed the horse, and the horse won. So Boudreaux caught sight of that. So the second race, he went out there and blessed the horse. Boudreaux went and bet on it, and the horse won. Well, this went on the whole evening, and they get to the 10th race, and the priest goes out there and he blesses the horse, and the horse came in last. Boudreaux had bet all his money on that horse. He goes to the priest and said, "Father," he said, "you bless all them horses and they win. You bless this one and it don't win. What's that?" The priest said, "That's the difference between," he said, "that's what it is with you Protestants. You don't know the difference between the blessing and the last rites." All right, let's bring Jerry Bach up here.
You guys have been sitting long enough. So I've got a little exercise thing for you. I'm going to sing "Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean," and every time you hear a B, you stand up. And if you're standing up, every time you hear a B, you sit down. Okay? So let's try that. Okay? Oh, by the way, Sil said, you can sing along. Don't do that. It really messes me up. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. Bring back, oh, bring back my Bonnie to me, to me. Bring back, oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. How about that? Now you guys are all limbered up. You know what? Boudreaux, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, I tell you what, this is the 5 times that I've been up here. Probably, yeah. Thanks, John. And I told you about my wife. I met her down in the dumps. I'm not going there anymore. When she was, when we just met one another, and she was so skinny, and she was so bow-legged, and I was so knock-kneed that when we stood together, we spelled ox. And she was a terrible cook. Terrible cook. The flies in the neighborhood took up a collection to get the screen door fixed. Now, she learned. She learned. I'd like to tell you a story about another unfortunate orphan called Rindersella. And Rindersella was an orphan. She lived with her muggly other and her two sicked step-wisters. And they treated her terrible. Terrible. She made them clop and mean and clop and mean all day long. And they lived in a community with the king and the prince, and the prince came of age. So they decided to throw a Banshee Fall. And the Pransom Hints was the host and invited all the eligible ladies to that Banshee Fall. So the muggly other and the two sicked wep sisters, they got all gussied up and ready to go. And poor Rindersella was left without a thing to wear, without transportation to the Banshee Fall. And so she cried and cried. And her Gary godmother popped up. She said, "Why are you crying?" And Rindersella said, "I don't have anything to wear." So the Gary godmother waved her magic wand, and Rindersella was clothed in the most beautiful gown you've ever seen. And off to the ball she went. And as she's going to the ball, the Gary godmother says, "The spell ends at midnight." Well, Rindersella went to the Banshee Fall with the Pransom Hints, and it was sub at first light. And they danced and danced all night long until the clock struck midnight. And Rindersella said, "Oh my goodness," and ran off. And you know what she did? She slopped her dripper. Yep. And the Pransom Hints found that dripper. And had a county-wide search for Rindersella, the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. And they went to house, trying the slipper on all the young maidens. And they come to the muggly other's house, and they tried it on the sicked web sisters, and it fitted it. tried it on the other one. It didn't fit either. And they say, "Oh, are those the only ladies of the house?" And Rindersella came out and said, "Here I am." And it fit it. And they lived happily ever after. So the moral of the story is, if the Pransom Hints invite you to a Bancy Fall, don't forget to slop your dripper. You want to hear the snake story?
Oh, you got another one?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, go.
There were two young snakes hissing around in their pit. And Mother Snake said, I don't want you hissing in your pit. I want you to go over to Mrs. Potts' pit to hiss because I'm going to the store, and I don't want you to go alone. So they go over to Mrs. Potts' pit to hiss, and Mrs. Potts comes out and say, "What are you doing hissing in my pit? Why don't you go over to your own pit to hiss?" And they tell her the story, that Mom's still going to the store, and she didn't want us to be alone, so she sent us over here. Mrs. Potts says, "I don't want the responsibility. You go over to your own pit to hiss." So they go over to their own pit to hiss, and Mama Snake comes home and sees she finds them hissing in the pit, and she gets all upset. "What are you doing hissing in our pit when I told you to go over to Mrs. Potts' pit to hiss?" And they tell her the story. Mrs. Potts didn't want the responsibility, so they sent him back to our own pit to hiss. And Mama Snake said, "Boy, I don't know what she's so uppity about. I knew Mrs. Potts when she didn't have a pit to hiss in."
Thank you, Jerry. Ooh, I'm glad he got that one all right. I didn't a while ago. And we want to give a big thanks to Jerry because he's in, for another reason, he is building our website and we'll be doing our NDICE newsletter. Live tomorrow morning. Fantastic, fantastic. You know, we had this couple here that's been on a road for about a month and a half, traveling over almost 4,000 miles. And, you know, we're talking about the McDonald's. And, you know, I got one word of advice for you being lost that long. Get advice from your wife for directions. He ran all over the country. I don't think he knew where he was going. But you know what he told her? He said, "I ain't lost. I still got gas in the tank." So, I don't know. But anyhow, the McDonald's have been on the road for a month and a half, and they're still going to be on the road some more. So, God love them. I wish I could do that. You know, tell y'all a few more stories before we wind up. Marie had this cat. Marie Boudreau had this cat, and Boudreau hated that cat. So one day he took that cat and he drove 25 miles and he dropped the cat off. Drove back home and the cat was already home. So the next day he drove the cat 50 miles from home and dropped it off. And lo and behold, before he got back home, that cat was back home again. Man, he said, "God bless." So the next day he put the cat in the car and he drove 150 miles and dropped the cat off. Before you know it, the phone rings. He said, "Marie," he said, "that cat's home?" She said, "Yeah, Boudreau, that cat's home." "Well, ask him for directions because I'm lost." You know, there are these archaeologists in New York that dug 100 feet down and they found copper wire. And in the New York Times, they had this big article that said, "Brilliant New York archaeologists dig 100 feet and find copper wire. Therefore, their ancestors had a communication system 100 years ago. Well, the people out in California heard about that, you know, and so the archaeologists started digging, and they dug 200 feet and found copper wire. And the LA Times had a big article that brilliant California archaeologists dig 200 feet and find copper wire. So their ancestors had a communication system 200 years ago. Well, Boudreaux heard about that. And he began to dig. And he dug, and he dug, and he dug, and he found nothing. But the Shoepick Times, where he lives, had an article that says, brilliant Cajun archaeologist digs 300 feet and finds nothing. Therefore, the Cajuns had a wireless communication system 300 years ago. You know, Boudreaux told Thibodeau one day, he said, you know, Tib, he said, I know everybody and everybody knows me. Thibodeau said, oh, Boudreaux, come on. He said, I bet you the governor don't know you. He said, I bet you $100 he does. So they drove to Baton Rouge. They get to the governor's office. Secretary says, Mr. Boudreaux, the governor will see you in just a minute. Come on in. Looked at Thibodeau, he said, you see? Thibodeau said, I bet you the president don't know you. Oh, yeah. He said, I bet you $1,000 the president knows me. So they drive to Washington, go into the president's office, and the secretary says, oh, Mr. Boudreaux, the president will see you in just a little while. Thibodeau was kind of frustrated by then. He said, well, I tell you what. He said, I bet you the Pope don't know you. He said, I'll bet you $5,000 that the Pope knows me. So they go to Rome, and they're out there when the Pope comes out for his audience, you know. He wasn't out there yet. And he told Thibodeau, he said, you stand right here. He said, I'm going to go up there on that little balcony. You're going to see me come out on that balcony with the Pope. Sure enough, here come two figures out on the balcony. And Thibodeau nudged the little guy next to him. He said, you know them two guys up there? He said, I don't know the one with the white beanie, but that other one's Boudreaux from Louisiana. Boudreaux was in New York City one time, and he saw this sign that said ventriloquist here. Well, Boudreaux ain't never seen a ventriloquist. So he went in there, and the ventriloquist had been doing his act down in Louisiana for quite a while, and his whole act was based on how dumb the Cajuns were. They eat bugs that come out the ditch. They ain't got enough sense to get out of the rain. They talk funny. Well, Boudreaux listened to that, but he wasn't too pleased. So after the show, he found his way back to the dressing room of the ventriloquist, and he knocked on the door. And the ventriloquist came out and said, can I help you? He said, yeah. He said, my name is Alcide Boudreaux. He said, I'm from Plocherville, Louisiana. He said, I'm 100% Cajun, and I did not like what was said tonight out there. He said, it's true. We eat bugs that come out the ditch. That's crawfish. That's good. He said, we eat alligator, too. And he said, you know, y'all kind of talk funny up here yourself. Ventriloquist said, well, Mr. Boudreaux, he said, I apologize. He said, I didn't mean anything by it. He said, it was just an act. Of course, I ain't talking to you. I'm talking to your smart little kid over there. You know, Boudreaux was going to the Holy Land, and he decided he wanted to rent a boat on the Sea of Galilee, to go out on the Sea of Galilee. So he told the travel agent, he said, I want to rent me a boat on the Sea of Galilee when I'm over there. Travel agent said, oh, Mr. Boudreaux, he said, that's going to be $500 an hour to rent that boat. He said, $500? He said, for that, I could rent me a shrimp boat for 2 weeks. He said, oh, you don't understand, Mr. Boudreaux. The Sea of Galilee, that's where Jesus walked on the water. And Boudreaux said, $500 an hour, no wonder he walked. Oh, Boudreaux, they're these guys that came from somewhere, and they went down to Louisiana and had this bar that said, all drinks, 10 cents. He went in there, and there was 4 of them, and they said, all drinks, 10 cents, how can that be? Well, the bartender said, well, he said, I won a lottery, and he says, I always wanted to do this all my life. Well, the guy said, well, okay, give us a martini. Well, brought them each a martini, and it was 40 cents. So they decided to have another one. And he brought him another one and another 40 cents. And by, he looked down there and there was two guys sitting down there in the bar not buying anything. He asked the bartender, they said, what about those two guys over there? Oh, he said, that's Boudreaux and Thibodeau. They're waiting for happy hour. Hey, I tell you, you know, Boudreaux was coming down the street and he had a bag, you know, and running to Thibodeau, and Thibodeau said, Boudreaux, he said, what you got in the bag? He said, I got some beers in that bag. Thibodeau said, Boudreaux, if I can guess how many beer you got in that bag, he said, you gonna give me one? Boudreaux said, yeah. Thibodeau said, you got two. He said, no. He said, I got 6. Oh, I done messed up. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I'll get it come back. Let me see. Boudreaux was applying for a job for as a switchman for the railroad, you know, and the guy that was interviewing him said, well, Mr. Boudreaux, he said, well, I've got to give you a situation to see if you can, you know, handle this job. He said, we got a train coming 50 miles an hour down this track. And he said, on the same track, we got a train going 50 miles an hour in the opposite direction. He said, how would you handle that? Boudreaux thought a while. He said, well, I think I'd call my buddy Thibodeau. The guy said, Thibodeau, he says, is he an expert on something like this? He said, no. He said, he ain't never seen a wreck like that before. They had this priest that went down the bayou and he was doing a mission when he was staying at a hotel. And he had to mail a letter back to his diocese where he came from. But he couldn't find the post office. So he went out on the street, and the first guy he ran into was Boudreaux. And he said, excuse me, sir. He says, can you help me find the post office? Boudreaux said, oh, yeah. He says, it's about a half a mile down the bayou there. And he says, it's on the right. You can't go left because you'll fall in the bayou. Priest said, my good man, he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. He says, look, I'm doing a mission at the church this week. He said, are you coming? Boudreaux said, no. He said, I go to Mass on Sunday. That's enough. He said, I ain't going during the week. The priest says, well, look, if you would come to that mission, I could help you find heaven. Boudreaux said, how you going to do that? You can't find the post office. Oh, Boudreaux was a painter. An artist. And word got around that he was pretty good, you know. So one day he's out in his front yard, and this big limousine drives up, and this lady comes out, and she says, you Mr. Boudreaux, the painter? Yeah, he said, that's me. She said, I heard you was pretty good. And, oh, he said, well, you know, me, I try, you know. She said, Mr. Boudreaux, I'll give you $20,000 to paint me in the nude. Boudreaux thought about that a while. He said, you know, I better go check with my wife, Marie, to see if that's all right. So he goes in the house. A little while later, he comes back out, and he says, yeah, Marie said it would be all right. He said, but I got one little question to ask you. She said, what's that? He said, can I keep my socks on and have a place to wipe my brushes? Boy, Boudreaux and Thibodeau loved that bungee jumping. They got into that, and they decided, you know, if we go down to Mexico and build a bungee jumping tower, we could make a little money. So they loaded their truck with their equipment, and off they went. Well, they got down there, and they started building the tower, and the Mexicans were kind of curious, and they gathered around, and by the time the tower was finished, there was quite a crowd down there. So Boudreaux looks at Thibodeau, and he said, you know, Tib, he said, I better try this thing out before we let the Mexican jump to make sure it's safe and everything, you know. So he tied the rope around him, and off he went. Well, he came back up, and he was kind of scratched up, and Thibodeau reached out for him, but he missed him. So he went down again. Second time up, he's a little more scratched up than the first time, and Thibodeau missed him again. Third time up, he was almost unconscious. Thibodeau reached out and grabbed him and pulled him onto the platform. He said, what's the matter, Boudreaux? He said, the cord's too long. He said, no, Thibodeau. He said, what's a pinata? Boudreaux and Thibodeau were in Sears watching the 6 o'clock news on the TVs in there, you know, and then the guy was sitting on a building and he was threatening to jump. Boudreaux looked at Thibodeau. He said, I bet you that man ain't going to jump. Man, no sooner than they made the bet, the man jumped. Boudreaux said, here, Thibodeau. He said, here's your money. You won it fair and square. Thibodeau said, no, Boudreaux. He said, I can't take your money. He said, I watched the 5 o'clock news. And he said, I knew that man was going to jump. Boudreaux said, I watched it too, but I didn't think he jumped twice. You know, Boudreaux got this job working on the high steel. They were building a bridge over the Mississippi River. And he had 2 buddies with him. One was a German named Hans, and the other one was an Italian named Angelo. Well, it would break time for lunch, and Angelo opened his lunch box, and he said, meatball sandwich again. He said, if that woman packed me a meatball sandwich tomorrow, he said, I'm jumping. Hans opened his lunch box. He said, oh, no. He said, bratwurst again. He said, if that woman makes bratwurst tomorrow, he said, I'm jumping. Boudreaux opened his lunch box, and there was a boudin sandwich. You know what boudin is, it's Cajun sausage. But anyhow, Boudreaux said, if there's Cajun sausage in my lunch box tomorrow, I'm jumping. Well, the next day, sure enough, they opened their lunch boxes. Angelo said, oh, no, meatball sandwich again. Bye, y'all, and he jumped. Hans opened his, and sure enough, that was bratwurst, and he jumped. Boudreaux opened his, and that was boudin again, and he jumped. Well, they all having a funeral for all 3 of them at the same time, and Angelo's with her, and Hans is with her crying. They say, oh, no, we should have known better. Those men were men of their word. We knew they were going to do it. We should have known that they were going to do that. Oh, and they went on and on. And Marie Boudreaux said, well, he said, I don't know what you also said about Boudreaux used to pack his own lunch. Boudreaux was in New Orleans one time, you know, and he was walking, and he wanted to cross the street, and there was a policeman directing traffic, directing the pedestrians across, and finally the light turned, and he said, all right, all you pedestrians, y'all come on across. And everybody went across but Boudreaux. Traffic started coming again, finally stopped again. He said, all right, all you pedestrians, come on over. Well, everybody went over except Boudreaux. Policeman walked over there and said, sir, he said, I done told y'all twice to come on over. Boudreaux said, yeah, you done told the Protestants. When you going to ask the Catholics to come over? You know, it's an old one, too, y'all may have heard that. Boudreaux used to work in a lumber yard. And he went to confession one time, and he said, Father, he said, bless me. He said, I stole some lumber from the lumber yard. And he said, I built a doghouse. Priest said, all right. He said, for your penance, say 12 Our Fathers. A few weeks later, Boudreaux comes back. He said, Father, bless me. He said, I stole enough lumber to build a fence around my doghouse. Priest said, all right, it's a little more serious. He said, you say 24 Our Fathers this time. A couple months later, Boudreaux comes back. He said, bless me, Father. He said, I stole enough lumber to build me a house. Priest said, oh. He said, that's real serious. He said, for that, you're going to have to make a novena. Boudreaux said, a novena, Father? He said, yeah. He said, I tell you what, Father, if you got the plans, I got the lumber. Well, folks, it's getting time to close. Well, I'll give you one more. You remember when they had the Olympics in Atlanta? Well, Boudreaux, Thibault, and Melanson went over there, and they didn't have tickets. So Melanson said, watch this. Picked up a manhole cover, and he walked by, and he said, Melanson, discus. And they let him in. Thibodeau, he picked up some of that rebarb. He walked by, he said, Thibodeau, javelin. and they let him in. Boudreaux, he picked up some barbed wire. He walked by and he said, Boudreaux, fencing. Oh, I'll give you one more, too. Boudreaux was in the bar one night. Boudreaux was in the bar one night, and boy, he got cockeyed. I mean, he was drunk. He couldn't even walk. So he started crawling home. And it wasn't a couple blocks down at his house. And he finally gets to his house. He barely gets in the door. And Maurice said, you've been drinking again, huh? Well, he said, how you know that? He said, because you left your wheelchair at the bar. Well, folks, it's time to go. We've had fun. Enjoyed exposing myself in front of y'all like this. And for those of y'all that don't know, and they told me if y'all was nice to me tonight, and y'all was certainly nice to me, I could share with y'all Boudreaux's cold remedy. You don't have to write this down. It's easy to remember. You get you about a 24-ounce glass, and you fill that half full of milk of magnesia. And the other half, you put mineral oil and castor oil. Then you put that in the ice box, and you go down at the drugstore and you buy a giant economy-sized box of X-Lax. You come home, and you eat that X-Lax and drink that concoction. Well, it's not going to do much for your cold, but it's going to make you think twice before you cough or sneeze. And before closing, I'd like to share this with you. So perhaps you've heard this before. It's entitled "The Station" by Robert Hastings. Tucked away in our subconscious minds is an idyllic vision. We see ourselves on a long trip that almost spans the continent. We're traveling by passenger train, and out of the windows we drink in the passing scene of cars on nearby highways, of children waving at the crossing, of cattle grazing on a distant hillside, of smoke pouring from a power plant, of row upon row of corn and wheat, of flatlands and valleys, of mountains and rolling hillsides, of city skylines and village halls, of biting winter and blazing summer and cavorting spring and docile fall. But uppermost in our minds is the destination. On a certain day, at a certain hour, we'll pull into the station. There will be bands playing and flags waving. And once we get there, so many wonderful dreams will come true. So many wishes will be fulfilled, and so many pieces of our lives finally will be fitted together like a completed jigsaw puzzle. How restlessly we pace the aisles, damning the minutes for loitering, waiting for the station. When we get to the station, that'll be it, we cry. Transforms, it means, when I'm 18, that'll be it. When I buy a new 450 SL Mercedes-Benz, that will be it. When I put the last kid through college, that'll be it. When I've paid off the mortgage, that'll be it. When I win that promotion, that'll be it. When I reach the age of retirement, that'll be it. I shall live happily ever after. However, sooner or later, we must realize there is no one station, no one place to arrive at once and for all. The true joy of life is the trip. The station is only a dream. It constantly outdistances us. Relish the moment is a good motto, especially when coupled with Psalm 118:24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It isn't the burdens of today that drive men mad. Rather, it is the regret over yesterday and the fear of tomorrow. Regret and fear are twin thieves who would rob us of today. So stop pacing the aisles and counting the miles. Instead, climb more mountains, eat more ice cream, go barefoot more often, swim more rivers, watch more sunsets, laugh more and cry less. Life must be lived as we go along. the station will come soon enough. And I close with this from Mother Teresa. When we pray, we believe. When we believe, we love. And when we love, we serve. God bless you all, and thank you for being here. And as we close tonight, as we do, has been tradition, we'll ask everybody who was on stage tonight and come forth. To come forth, and we always close with this song, and of course it was sung in church today, I think. Holy God, we praise thy name. And we invite everyone to sing too.
Just don't fall off the back. Do not fall off the back. Don't fall off the back of the stage.
Yeah. Don't get your
I've only had 2 bourbons, so don't push.
Here comes our people in the front. The better looking folks in the front. There you go.
Everybody stand. Are we ready?
Okay.
Ready, go. Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before thee. All on earth thy scepter claim. All in heaven above adore thee. Infinite thy vast domain, everlasting is thy reign. Infinite thy vast domain, everlasting is thy reign. And all God's people said, Amen. Oh, that's what I'm fixing to say. And the bar is still open, folks, so let's patronize our nice young men who are serving us beautifully. Thank the guys who were doing the film, video, and posting things on. Good night, everyone, and see you in the morning or before.